This is Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty in a Google search for my site. This is a blog post from a woman who was a victim of domestic abuse. It's in the news now. That's 7 months after it was written, because her abuser is her ex-husband, and that is Rob Porter, who has resigned, and his story remains in the headlines. I don't mention her name, not because it's not known. She does mention her name, and it's in this blog, but instead here's the URL for her post. Why I stayed. The first time he called me a fucking bitch was on our honeymoon. I found out years later he had kicked his first wife on theirs. A month later, he physically prevented me from leaving the house. Less than 2 months after that, I filed a protective order with the police because he punched in the glass on our front door while I was locked inside. We bought a house to make up for it. Just 1 year anniversary, he pulled me naked and dripping from the shower and yelled at me. Everyone loved him. People commented all the time how lucky I was. Strangers complimented him to me every time we went out. But in my home, the abuse was insidious. The threats were personal, and terror was real. And yet I stayed. When I tried to get help, I was counseled to consider carefully how I might affect his career. So I kept my mouth shut and I stayed. I was told, yes, he was deeply flawed, but then again, so was I. And so I worked at myself and stayed. If he was a monster all the time, perhaps it would have been easier to leave. But he could be kind and sensitive. And so I stayed. He cried and apologized. And so I stayed. He offered to get help and even went to a few counseling sessions and therapy groups. And so I stayed. He belittled my intelligence and destroyed my confidence. And so I stayed. I felt ashamed and trapped. And so I stayed. Friends and clergy didn't believe me. And so I stayed. I was pregnant, and so I stayed. I lost the pregnancy, became depressed. And so I stayed. Abuse is indifferent. Education level, socioeconomic status, race, age, and gender. And no one can ever know the dynamics of another's relationship. My cycle continued for 4 more years. Afterward, I let go and welcomed hard work of healing and forgiveness. My experience made me stronger and able to love more deeply, but my heart breaks for him. In the end, who's the real victim of his choices? This has been Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty in a Google search for my site. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, good evening, or restful night's sleep. Ciao.